there's this part of me that feels like I always have to justify the space I take up. And the way I justify the space that my products take up in this world is because they are different in some way. They're a unique concept in some way. And I feel somehow really anxious about the thought of making something that is just pretty, because I'm like, yeah, but it's pretty, but then it like needs to have a twist, or it needs to be different. It needs to be something somebody hasn't done before. And I think that that's honestly a great brief to give myself, but sometimes I also wish I could just give myself some slack and be like, no, I'm allowed to exist in the world without like bringing all the bells and whistles.
Were you always inquisitive? Were you always making things? Were you always interested in that kind of thing?
Tell us your childhood. Tell us your secrets.
Let's jump in the emotional deep end right away. You know, I always say that I was like a free range child. So kind of like a free range chicken, but minus the slaughter. Because I was just, you know, romping around in the forest, and I was very project oriented, and I loved like making little wood sculptures and things like that. But I wouldn't say that I wasn't like picking apart engines and things like that. I got into making as I do it today in my mid-20s. So
what was the first thing, and what made it go from ideas to I'm going to do this?
You know, I mean, the main gateway drug for making, for me, the thing that really led me down this dark rabbit hole was just having ideas that I was really excited about. So I had an idea. I think it was like a website, but I wanted you, as you went on the website, that things would move in real life. And I started like trying to parse how to do that. And that led me to learning about hardware. And I just remember first time, like the most basic thing you can do with a microcontroller is usually like blink a little LED on top of it. And I uploaded the like pre-made test code for that and made the LED blink. And I just felt like a fucking, sorry, can I say fucking?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Please. I just felt like a fucking wizard. And I just remember being like, I felt so powerful. And I think that is kind of the feeling I keep on going for. It's just a thirst for power. And every time I learn a new skill or kind of conquer a project, it's something very Roman right now. I just feel so powerful.
Your stuff is so funny too. When did you decide you were going to blend humor with making these kinds of odd things that you make?
The thing is, I can be incredibly pretentious, and I can set the bar very high for myself. And I was kind of a recovering perfectionist, and I really wanted to learn about electronics and robotics. I thought that shitty robots, which is the technical term, was really funny, but it was also a way for me to lower the bar, because if I'd set out to be like, I'm going to build something that makes perfect sense and that beautifully solves a problem, I would never have gotten done, or never even gotten started, really. So it was just a way to lower the bar for myself and to kind of forcefully infuse it with joy. Like it's a foie gras of joy to be like, I'm just going to do it because it'll look funny.
And how long did it take to become known as the queen of shitty robots?
Honestly, it was really quick. And for the record, it was not a title that I chose for myself.
Right.
But yeah, it was within, I think, 6 months of posting my first shitty robots, I was working full time as a maker and online creator. So it was really, really fast and really overwhelming, but in a incredibly fun way.
When did you decide you'd actually make a YouTube channel?
So initially, I was actually just making GIFs. The main content deliverable that I was going for was just making GIFs, which honestly is a great brief for yourself, because you have to make something that is clear and self-explanatory enough that somebody who watches like maybe a 5-second looping video of it with no audio understands what's going on. So it was honestly a good way of like refining my ideas and making them really, really clear. So I would post these GIFs. I post them mostly on Reddit or on Twitter. And then people started requesting getting longer videos around it. And I started making YouTube videos kind of as an afterthought.
And did you stop becoming a maker and just concentrate full-time on the channel?
No, I mean, the videos I was making was about building stuff. So I was never like, get ready with me.
Right.
Although your get ready with me would take like 3 years, right?
Yeah. I do remember now, just because I said I did make a get ready with me, but it was just like a joke where I was like, and this is how I wake up in the morning. And then it was an alarm clock that slapped me in the face with a rubber hand. And this is how I have my breakfast. And it's a robot arm that throws milk and cereal everywhere. So I did do a get ready with me, but that was as a joke.
You moved from robots to more conventional, I guess you would call it, inventions. Is that been on purpose, or what's driven you that way?
I mean, lots of different things. There are kind of two main reasons for deciding to transition into product design. One is, just realizing I don't want to run my YouTube channel until I'm 70. Like, I really feel like I'm growing out of it in certain ways. As much as you can have it grow with you, I feel very done with being a content creator in that sense. So there was kind of a personal reason, but also a big part of it is just business wise, running a content creation business, or kind of where you're the product, like I'm the product. It's a very brittle business.
Right.
And I realized that if I'm not well enough to be on a stage or in front of a camera, everything kind of falls down. And I'm not comfortable with expanding the company and hiring more people and trying to grow it when everything hinges on me. That I don't want to have that type of pressure. I mean, really early on in my career, I decided, like, what is my definition of success? And my definition is to be able to decide how I spend my time. And scaling a content creation business really aggressively gives you no freedom in how you spend your time. So kind of starting a product business where I still get to think about everyday problems and how to solve them in fun and unsuspecting ways, but also being able to take time off because I'm not the only person who can do every step of it.
Is that your company, Yetch? Is that what it's called?
Yes. So it's called the Yetch store. And holy hell, it has been a painful ride, but I'm hanging in there and I'm learning a lot. And I'm very proud of myself for trying. But sometimes I'm like, am I very naive for trying to start such a difficult business as a product business? But I'm really enjoying the work. So there's that.
You spent a lot of time showing us the process of the hanger, you really went through it. And I was reading the comments, people were really excited about, you showed what didn't work and you showed the messiness of it, which I think is fantastic. I want to know, why were you thinking about a hanger that could fold in half? Like, was it your own sense of space? You didn't have enough space. Like, I think it's really where your things are so unique to you. Like, they're coming out of your, DNA corpus of who you are, which is wonderful. So I'm just curious about, where does that idea come from, for example?
Yeah, I think that this is one of the main differences and main upsides to run your own product company, because I'm not like beholden to a shareholder or having to think about like, ooh, who's the target audience for this? Like, every project starts specifically, we call it the coat hanger because it's a coat hanger that hinges, was because I wanted to fit a coat rack in my bedroom, but it just didn't work out. Like, if I had it in one direction, I couldn't open the door. If I had it in the other direction, I couldn't open a drawer. And I thought, why do you not have coat hangers that fold in half so they only take up half of the space from the wall? So it's very much like just a minor inconvenience or annoyance that I have in my life, and then spending a amount of time that is hard to justify on solving it. Other than that, now it's my job and I deeply enjoy it. But, spending 3 years thinking about a foldable coat hanger is an absolute luxury. And once again, just being able to choose how I spend my time. And that is apparently how I want to spend it.
So it took 3 years to design it, but on day one, you have a problem. And then is that 3 years of rapid prototyping? They don't work, and then I got to go back to the drawing board? Like, what are the challenges you face over the period of time?
So, I mean, I just want to clarify, it's obviously not 3 years full time, but it's 3 years having it in the back of my head and then spurts of rapid prototyping. So first, it's just like, okay, how could I solve this problem? And it's coming up with coat hangers that fold down the middle. And then There's a lot of prototyping of just trying to figure out how does it fold? What other constraints might there be? How do I make sure it stays in place once it's folded? And once I have prototypes that I think work for me and I can test out the use case, I mean, then I decided that, oh, I think this would be a really interesting product to manufacture. And then that starts an entirely different process, which is design for manufacturing. And it's a very different thing to make 12 of something and 12,000 of something. So there are a whole horde of other limitations that I have to take into consideration. So the design that I made for myself and the design that we end up sending to customers are, I mean, they're completely different. They're not even cousins.
What kind of differences are there?
So, for example, the ones I made for myself were made out of plywood. Like that was the first prototype, but you cannot manufacture plywood in that way with speed. So we ended up moving over to a metal coat hanger, and then it's, taking into consideration, how does it fold? How does it sound when it folds? Because I remember we initially had a metal hinge, but it was kind of squeaky. Too noisy? Once you added friction to it. So then we ended up with an acetal hinge, which is the type of plastic that has really low friction. And then it's like, okay, but then you have to injection mold that. And then there's a lot of limitations for that. You can't have this shape. You can't have this shape. So it just fractals out into more issues to solve.
How many people are involved in a process from taking an idea like that? Like you have the idea yourself, you've kind of worked out the prototype yourself. And then how many additional people do you need to actually work through what it's going to cost, what materials it's made of? Is there a place for people to buy it? All those kinds of questions.
So I have 2 full-time employees on the product business. So there's an engineer and then a head of manufacturing. So my engineer and I started working on different prototypes, and he's in the UK. So it's a lot of just Skype calls for some reason. We're just on Skype.
Right.
And us sitting and thinking about it. And then my head of manufacturing is starting to talk to factories, learning about what tooling they have, what limitations they have, kind of sending prototypes to them and getting feedback on it and how we could make it easier for them to manufacture. So we're a really small team, and I'm incredibly proud of what we're able to do on such a small team. But that's also why we only launch one new product a year, because we are literally doing it all on a tiny, tiny budget.
How do you find the customers?
Yeah, so I mean, the easiest thing would obviously be to just target people who already follow me and to use my social media platforms to market to them. But the whole point of starting the product business was to get out of being an influencer. So I very early on decided for the product business that it's not merchandise. It's not for people who are fans of me or interested in me. I want somebody who has no idea who I am and who doesn't care about it to still be interested in our product. So I've kind of been shying away from promoting it too much on my own social media platforms. So a lot of it is just targeted marketing online. We don't have any brick and mortar shows. They sold my electronic calendar at the MoMA design store for a little bit, which was fun. But that's still the only wholesale operation that we've done.
Which, by the way, is very beautiful, that everyday calendar.
Thank you.
How many ideas do you have at one time? Do you have 20 ideas and then you go, okay, now we're going to select this one to go forward with?
We do have more ideas than we have bandwidth. So we have a backlog. So there's kind of a queue of ideas or projects that I've made that I want to explore if we can manufacture them. So we currently have 3 projects in the pipeline that are at different stages of development. But yeah, I mean, I wish we could do 10 at the same time, but we can't. Just don't have the bandwidth for it.
I want to go back to something like the idea, it starts with an audience of one, which I love, as any artist should be, right? Which I think of you as an artist, engineer. I mean, you're a lot of things.
Thank you.
But it's something that the way that I see some of the work that you've been doing, whether it's really funny and weird, like the popcorn thing, which we can get into, but it makes your life a little bit easier. So it's like the whole UX design thing. It's like you're designing products that make your life better, which is obvious. That's what we all should be doing, or all designers and engineers should be doing, but they don't always do that. And so what I see, the final products, when I watch what you're doing and then I go to the store, the sort of aesthetic ultimately is very important to you, though. Like the vinyl hanger, for example, I could have used that at one point. Too late now, but how important is that as well in the end? And they're kind of almost like art pieces. They're just well made. Everything about the magnet. I mean, just everything was so intriguing to me. Like,
I've always shied away from referring to anything I do as art because I think artists are too cool for me. Like, I'm not like veiled in mystery. There's nothing, but I think I gotta get around to that because I do think that some of the things that I make are art because they exist because I want them to and not necessarily because they serve a very clear or functional purpose. I do want to say, like, aesthetically, it is more an afterthought with the products. Of course, I want them to look really good, but it is not how I enter the process. I know a lot of people and product designers and artists, they're looking for it to have a certain aesthetic or a certain vibe. But for me, it's always like functionality first, and then you kind of try to make it look decent. I think there's this part of me that feels like I always have to justify the space I take up. And the way I justify the space that my products take up in this world is because they are different in some way. They're a unique concept in some way. And I feel somehow really anxious about the thought of making something that is just pretty because I'm like, yeah, but it's pretty, but then it like needs to have a twist or it needs to be different. It needs to be something somebody hasn't done before. And I think that that's honestly a great brief to give myself, but sometimes I also wish I could just give myself some slack and be like, no, I'm allowed to exist in the world without like bringing all the bells and whistles.
When you partner like with Weta, what was that like? Was it a similar methodology?
Weta Workshop, which is a prop studio in New Zealand and who did all the props for Lord of the Rings, reached out and asked if I wanted to do a project with them, which of course I wanted to do. And they were like, okay, what do you want to make? Like, we can make anything. And I just creatively choked. And for some reason, the idea that I like croaked out was to make a mantis shrimp costume, but that it was a business mantis shrimp. So it's kind of a pun. So it's basically a mantis shrimp that wears a suit and a little briefcase. And I thought that it would be really fun to do like a short film of this mantis shrimp having traveled from the ocean to try to blend into human society and kind of given up his very colorful life for like an office job. It wasn't much more than that. And it was more just an excuse to go hang.
Oh, did you actually go there and do it?
Yeah. Yeah. So I got to be there for, I think, 10 days and work on it. And it's just amazing. As somebody who's a huge fan of Lord of the Rings and who was obsessed with the movies as a kid, that was a true treat.
Converting the Tesla truck, how did that come about?
Yeah, that was a big project. But I turned a Tesla Model 3 into a pickup truck. This was in 2018, so it was before any of the other like electric pickup trucks were on the market. And I really wanted to drive an electric car. I really needed a pickup truck for work.
Yeah.
And that was kind of my weird girl math thing where I was like, wait, if I just make it myself, then it'll be great. And just put together a team of mechanics and people and worked on it for a long time. And yeah, it was actually the first Tesla pickup truck on the market because it came out way before the Cybertruck. So we did like a spoof truck commercial that's very like, some trucks rely on roads already paved and some pave their own.
The toothbrush helmet.
Yeah.
How'd you come up with that?
So the toothbrush helmet that you're referring to is actually the first shitty robot that I made and kind of what kickstarted my entire career. So the real story behind it, like the simple story is that I just posted it online. I made it because I wanted to make it and I posted it online. But the longer story of it was that I was really into electronics and I wanted to make a kids show about electronics. And I was like, oh, I could like host it and write it and build it. And I shot this horrible little pilot episode with my friend's camera in my bedroom in San Francisco. And I sent it, I'm from Sweden. So I sent it to SVT, which is like the big public network in Sweden, hoping that they would be like, wow, look at this girl and her video filmed in her bedroom. Let's give her a show. They did not get back to me. So I thought, okay, but I have this toothbrush helmet that I built for it. I might as well just post a little video of it. And I did, and it went viral. And then I was just off and running. And the real fun part about that, or the deeply satisfying part of it, if I can be petty, is that 6 months later, they reached out and they were like, oh my God, yeah, of course, we would love to work with you. And then I was so deeply into my own business that I was like, sorry, I'm not interested anymore. So,
What was this problem you were solving for yourself?
that one was just because I thought it would be a funny visual, and like brushing your teeth is boring. Like, what if you could have a robot arm do it for you? So basically, it's a helmet with a robot arm, kind of like a unicorn horn, and then a toothbrush at the end of it, and it brushes your teeth. So I think at that stage, I was just like going for funny visuals.
Right. And would that be popcorn as well? What was the idea with popcorn?
The popcorn helmet. Okay, so it was like a beer helmet, but instead of 2 beer cans, there were popcorn containers and then 2 big plastic hands that fed you popcorn. Yeah, I guess it was just not wanting to have to put popcorn in my mouth by myself, you know? Why use your own hands when you can use plastic hands?
Do you keep the inventions around? Are they all in your office there?
Some of them are here. I mean, we have my brain shredder. So I took a bunch of my MRI scans and I made a paper shredder where you put paper in between the 2 halves of my brain. I have a teeth wall that all actuate with the little keyboard that you have so you can play a wall of teeth. Most of them are in storage. Really early on, I would always like harvest parts off of earlier projects because getting new parts was expensive. So I would kind of just steal motors and linkages and things like that. But now I really try to keep them as they are because you know what? Maybe there's a museum curator in the future that I'm making a huge favor by not picking them all apart.
Well, I was just thinking that. And museum curator, if you're out there, start thinking now. I think they should be in the museum. I'm glad you're keeping track of every single thing.
They can wait until I'm dead.
Yeah. You just talked a little bit about your health journey. Did your health journey affect what you were thinking about afterwards? Is that part of why you're doing Yetch?
Yeah. I mean, how could you not? So I had a brain tumor. I was diagnosed with a brain tumor in 2018 and had brain surgery and went through radiation treatment. And that was definitely one of the pivot points where I was kind of reassessing what I was spending my time doing. I realized that I wanted to stop building just silly things and that I wanted to build things that actually solved problems for me or attempted to solve problems for me. And also when I realized that like running a content creation business is incredibly brittle. And, you know, I was really lucky because the internet actually ended up supporting me economically through my surgery because I had a Patreon and they just came out in force, you know, and I was lucky because it was only about 2 years of treatment and not being able to work at full speed. But, you know, what happens beyond that if you're not so lucky?
Where do creative ideas come from? You know, it's like, are you in the shower or you see a problem? Like, where do they come from?
Yeah, I think the first step is definitely problem. So like any little minor inconvenience that I have in my life, you know, a project that I did, I was really annoyed that my fruit bowl was either too full or too empty. Like I never had the perfect amount of fruit for my fruit bowl. And I made a fruit bowl that telescopes so you can change the diameter of it depending on how much fruit you have. So that's just like a little like eyesore on my kitchen counter. And I'm like, oh, I want to figure out a better way to do this. And then starting to think about fruit bowls. How have other people solved this problem? What's a different way that nobody else has done really? And then just lots of sketching and then prototyping and taking it from there.
Miles Davis famously said, somebody asked him, you know, how do you come up with new music? And he said, well, it's not a question of coming up with new music. It's a question of getting it to stop.
Yeah.
Does it feel like that too as an inventor?
No, it can definitely stop. Like, I think I always have a lot of ideas and I love like talking to people about what their jobs are. And then I just immediately like kind of almost like a tick start coming up with ideas in their field. But I mean, there are definitely ways to make it stop. And that is to work myself too hard or to not be in like a good headspace or to just feel really overwhelmed and cornered. And I mean, that's kind of a good thing because it forces me to really look after myself. Because for me to be good at my job, I need to be having a good time. And for me to have a good time, I need to have like 8 to 9 hours of sleep. So
You have a background in advertising, yeah? You worked in advertising for a bit.
I did a year of advertising school. And that was kind of where I started programming because I realized I didn't like advertising that much, but I really liked building websites. And that's then what led me to electronics. And then I, off of that, got an internship at an electronics company as like their maker in residence. So my job was just to build fun projects with their electronics products. So I never really worked in advertising, but I think it's definitely there's an overlap. And I guess I do now work in advertising because the core of my business model for the influencer side is to just be a human billboard and try to increase the value of being that human billboard.
Right. What role does play in sort of developing your ideas as an engineer?
I think play plays a big role, but also I don't know. I think there's a very even split between play and then just grit because the play is definitely there. And I think like the play happens for me when I set the bar really low and I try to find a fun, like just create a fun environment for myself to create. But it's not, you know what? I like wouldn't say that it's always a fun process. It's always deeply satisfying, but often the builds feel like running a fucking marathon and like wheezing the whole time. So I think there's definitely a lot of like perseverance required because I'm kind of going off road and trying to build something that is pushing my skills, but that's something that I haven't really seen other people do. So there's no manual for it. So yeah, it's play, and I deeply enjoy it. I find it deeply satisfying, but it's also really, yeah, it can be really tough at points.
You've worked in some specific areas. Are there other places you think, well, wow, I'd like to try this kind of thing?
Honestly, no. I love what I do. I've had a lot of different jobs. I'm fairly young, but I've tried out a lot of different things. And this is the job where everything kind of clicked because it uses every skill that I have and every part of my brain. But with that said, it's like you want to tweak the context in which you're doing the job. So, I mean, building things for YouTube is different from building things for a product business or building things for an art exhibit. But I really just love bringing ideas and making them kind of shitting them out in a very painful process.
What's the average length it takes to make some of these things?
It really depends. But I would say usually it's like a month from idea to finished video. So maybe 2 weeks from idea to finished project. And then there's post-production and video. And yeah, so like a month.
Do you have any ones of these creations that you're most fond of?
I mean, currently I'm so in love with the coat hinger. I'm really, really proud of it. And it's also, we're at a nerve-wracking time because we have shipped them out to our customers. And I am just starting to get photos and mentions online of people unboxing them or looking at them for the first time. And you are just at the edge of the seat, hoping that there's not an unforeseen issue or something. Like, it is really, really scary and also just so fun and exciting. So yeah, the coat hinger has definitely been top of mind. And I think it's kind of the shining star of like, or like the gold standard for the type of projects that I want to do, which is solving everyday problems in unique ways.
Getting it into the small, what is it called? The small home, the tiny home community.
Yeah. Yeah.
It would be incredible because you're really solving something for that crowd.
Yeah. You know, a lot of the feedback I got was people just being like, this doesn't solve a problem. And I'm like, this is a problem. If you haven't had it, you don't understand that it's a problem. But if you've had it, you really get what it's doing. And I think the tiny house community is very ready for it.
Yeah, they're going to rally around you. I love the feedback you do get on YouTube as well. You've got a very engaged community. Do you spend a lot of time there, communicating with them when things go up? Like, Do you feel like those are your people? Do you feel connected to the fans in that way?
This is a tricky one to talk about because I don't want to sound disconnected in a way but I really think that I used to engage a lot more with people a couple of years ago. And that was kind of what I felt that I needed to do. And also because it was enjoyable. And now, I mean, a lot of what I'm doing, like I'm not posting that much. I've done a lot to try to increase the distance between myself and viewers, not because they're the sweetest people. Like they're absolutely amazing. And whenever I run into somebody in real life, they're always like so kind and respectful. And I mean, my comment sections are some of the kindest ones I've ever come across on the internet, which I don't know what I've done to deserve. But I'm definitely I'm not like running a Discord server or letting people in on what's going on in my life. And I think that's something that I realize that I don't want to do those things because I feel like it impacted the quality of my life. And that's really the most important thing. Like nobody has more right to you than you do. And I felt a lot of pressure to share a lot of myself, not from my audience, but from like what the industry standard was. And then I realized I don't want to do that. Like, I don't want to tell people what I'm doing every day. I don't want to share things. Like, they get when I'm ready to share what I've been working on, they get that. But I'm not like, it's not a perpetual call and response. And that's kind of something that I've scaled back a lot in the last couple of years.
That sounds healthy.
In general, the social media aspect of it all, getting off the treadmill of it. What's the strangest object you've used in a creation?
Oh, it depends on how crude I can be. There's a clear winner for this, and that is 2016, first time Trump got elected. And I was in Germany with my friend Laura, and we were both really upset about it. And I wanted to make a pussy grabs back machine. So I was like, okay, but what if there's like a mouse trap and there's an arm that kind of explodes into the crotch of the other person if they try to reach for your crotch? And we were like, okay, let's build that. And it was all like the day after he had gotten elected. And we were like, we need a plastic hand. We're in Germany. Where can we get it? And we realized there's a place that very reliably has plastic hands, and that's a sex store. So it was like a fisting hand, this giant, heavy fisting hand. And then we ended up, because it's in not an ideal hand position. And we ended up like cutting the fingers apart and re-gluing them to kind of open up the hand a little bit more. So yeah, that is the weirdest object that I've used in a build by far.
Jesse, I don't think you could have anticipated that response.
I wouldn't have guessed.
Where can you get a plastic hand on a Sunday?
Like, keep that thing alive, if you know what I'm saying, just in case.
Yeah.
Could you ever have a robot that like made a rainbow or something like that? Some phenomenon? Storm clouds or something strange?
No, I have not. But I do remember brainstorming about having your own in-house rainbow and how you could do that.
Yeah.
But then I saw that there were some like mist stations with lights that kind of projected as rainbows. And I was like, okay, somebody's done something like that. But I do remember thinking like it would be really cool to have your own, like have a rainbow in your living room.
Do you ever say, okay, this time I'm just going to take only objects from this kitchen or from this living room? Do you ever make it harder for yourself by limiting it?
So I gotta say, I don't think that limiting it is making it harder necessarily. Often like the limitations are what give you the playground with which to ideate. I do actually do that. And one of my products is what we call the build dice, and that I made with my friend Laura. Basically, it's a set of 3 dice, and one has materials, one has objects, and one has properties on it, and you can roll it and you get a very specific brief. So it's like, make furniture out of cardboard that also plays music.
Right.
And then you can kind of ideate within that. So I really like those types of projects. Something else I've done was I remember writing a bunch of objects on pieces of paper in one pile and then a bunch of materials in another pile and then pulling different combinations. And what I made was ended up getting coffee table out of matches. And I made this entire coffee table out of matches that I then put on fire and then put out and sealed in epoxy. And yeah, I think it's really, really fun to ideate within limitations.
Now, where does that one sit now?
That one is in storage.
You must have a huge storage place.
Not big enough because it is overfilling. I always imagine if somebody would break into it and what they would think.
Right.
They would be so confused. But please, really hope that never happens.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. Thank you for sharing a little bit about the way you think about the world.
Thank you so much.